The ultrasound photo slipped from Sofia's trembling fingers as she stared at the text message on her husband's phone. The black and white image of their unborn daughter fluttered to the hardwood floor while her world crumbled around her. The message was from someone named Vanessa, and the words burned into her retinas. "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. James is working late again. Perfect timing." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sofia's hand instinctively moved to her 7-month pregnant belly as nausea washed over her. The baby kicked, as if sensing her mother's distress, and Sofia had to grip the marble countertop of their kitchen island to steady herself. Her husband James's phone had been buzzing incessantly during dinner, and when he'd stepped out to take what he claimed was a work call, he'd left his device behind. The screen had lit up with that devastating message, changing everything in an instant. Sofia Martinez had always believed in fairy tales, perhaps naively so. At 28, she was a successful pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, known for her gentle touch with young patients and her unwavering optimism. Her colleagues often joked that she could find silver linings in thunderclouds, a trait that had drawn James to her like a moth to flame when they'd met 3 years earlier at a medical conference in Atlantic City. James Whitmore was everything Sofia had dreamed of in a partner, a respected cardiologist with piercing blue eyes and a charming smile that could disarm anyone. He'd pursued her with the kind of romantic intensity she'd only read about in novels. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of candlelit dinners, weekend getaways to Martha's Vineyard, and thoughtful gestures that made her friends envious. When he'd proposed on the beach in Cape May at sunset, presenting her with her grandmother's vintage emerald ring that he'd somehow convinced her mother to give him, Sofia felt like the luckiest woman alive. Their wedding had been intimate but elegant, held in the gardens of a historic mansion outside Philadelphia. Sofia's younger sister Carmen had been her maid of honor, though their relationship had always been complicated. Where Sofia was nurturing and selfless, Carmen was ambitious and self-centered, traits that had created tension between them since childhood. Carmen worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative, a job that required constant travel and networking, leaving little time for family obligations or maintaining close relationships.
Conversations. Sofia had dismissed her unease as pregnancy hormones when she'd noticed these behaviors becoming more frequent after announcing their pregnancy. The pregnancy had been planned and celebrated. After a year of trying, Sofia had been overjoyed when the test showed 2 pink lines. James had lifted her off her feet and spun her around their kitchen, both of them crying tears of happiness. They'd spent hours discussing names, decorating the nursery in soft lavender and cream, and dreaming about their daughter's future. Sofia had felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. But now, staring at that text message, Sofia realized how blind she'd been. How many late nights had James claimed to be performing emergency surgeries? How many weekend medical conferences had taken him away from home? How many times had Carmen been mysteriously unavailable when Sofia had called, only to surface days later with vague explanations about work demands? Sofia's hands shook as she scrolled through more messages. The conversation thread went back months, filled with intimate exchanges that made her stomach turn. There were photos she couldn't bring herself to look at, plans for secret getaways, and worst of all, discussions about their relationship and her pregnancy that revealed how little respect either of them had for her. In one particularly cruel exchange, Carmen had written, "She's so naive, she actually believes you're working all those nights?" James had responded, "I know, sometimes I feel guilty, but she's so focused on the baby anyway. I don't think she'd notice if I disappeared for a week." The betrayal felt like a physical wound, sharp and deep, stealing her breath. Sofia had given James everything, had trusted him with her heart, her future, her unborn child. And Carmen, the sister she'd protected and supported through every crisis, had taken the one thing that mattered most to her. The sound of James's key in the front door made Sofia's pulse race. She quickly placed his phone back where she'd found it and moved to the living room, settling into her favorite reading chair with a book she couldn't see through her tears. When James entered, his expression was relaxed, even cheerful. "Hey, beautiful," he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "How are my girls doing tonight?" The casual endearment that had once filled her with warmth now felt like acid. Sofia forced herself to smile, though she wondered if he could see the devastation in her eyes. "We're fine. How was your emergency surgery? Challenging, but successful, James replied smoothly, loosening his tie. The patient should make a full recovery. I'm exhausted, though. Mind if I grab a quick shower before bed? Sophia nodded, not trusting her voice. As soon as she heard the water running, she retrieved his phone again, this time taking photos of the most damning messages with her own device. Her nursing training had taught her to document everything, and some rational part of her brain was already preparing for the confrontation she knew was coming.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Immediately insisted they should see her. Sophia agreed, curious to observe them together now that she knew the truth. Carmen arrived an hour later, dressed in a figure-hugging red dress that seemed inappropriate for a casual family visit. She hugged Sophia carefully, mindful of her pregnant belly, but Sophia noticed how her sister's eyes immediately sought out James. Throughout the evening, Sophia watched their subtle interactions, the meaningful glances, the way Carmen's laughter seemed to linger on James's jokes, the casual touches that lasted just a moment too long. At one point, when Sophia went to the kitchen to prepare tea, she heard them speaking in low voices. When she returned, they were sitting farther apart, and Carmen was asking about the nursery preparations. The performance was flawless, but Sophia could now see through it completely. After Carmen left, James seemed energized in a way Sophia hadn't seen in weeks. He was attentive and affectionate, which she realized with growing revulsion was probably due to seeing his mistress. The thought made her physically ill, and she excused herself to bed early, claiming fatigue. That night, lying beside her husband while he slept peacefully, Sophia felt more alone than she ever had in her life. The man she'd pledged to spend her life with was betraying her with her own sister, and somehow she was the one who felt like she was living a lie. The baby kicked restlessly, and Sophia whispered soft apologies to her daughter for the chaos surrounding her arrival into the world. Sophia spent the following days researching divorce lawyers and trying to figure out her next steps. The practical concerns were overwhelming. Their house was in both their names, but James earned significantly more than she did. Her maternity leave was scheduled to begin in a few weeks, which would reduce their income just when she might need to establish her independence. The thought of raising a child alone terrified her, but staying with James now seemed impossible. She confided in her closest friend and colleague, Maria, during a lunch break at the hospital. Maria had been skeptical of James from the beginning, though she'd kept her opinions to herself out of loyalty to Sophia. Now, hearing about the betrayal, her reaction was swift and fierce. "I knew there was something off about him," Maria said, her voice tight with anger. "He was always too smooth, too charming. And Carmen, I never liked how she looked at him during your wedding reception. She was practically undressing him with her eyes while you were cutting the cake." The memory hit Sophia like a slap. She'd been so happy that day, so focused on celebrating their union, that she'd missed the signs that were apparently obvious to others. How many people had seen what she'd been blind to? Maria helped Sophia research her legal options and accompanied her to a consultation with a divorce attorney. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Burns, was direct about Sophia's situation. Because Sophia had evidence of the affair and they lived in a no-fault divorce state, she would likely receive favorable terms in a settlement. However, the process would be emotionally difficult, especially with a baby coming. "You need to decide whether you want to confront him directly or have legal papers served," Patricia explained. "Given that the other woman is your sister, this is going to be complicated on multiple levels. I'd recommend documenting any additional evidence you can gather and preparing for a potentially nasty battle." Sophia left the attorney's office feeling overwhelmed, but more determined than ever. She'd spent too many years cleaning up Carmen's messes and putting other people's needs before her own. This time, she was going to fight for herself and her daughter. That evening, James announced he had another emergency surgery scheduled for the weekend, which would keep him at the hospital overnight. Sophia nodded sympathetically, privately wondering if he'd be spending the night with Carmen instead.
The ease with which he lied to her face was almost as hurtful as the affair itself. After he left Saturday morning, Sofia drove to her parents' house in South Philadelphia. She needed to tell them about the situation before they heard it from someone else, though she dreaded her reaction. Her mother had always favored Carmen slightly, making excuses for her behavior and blaming Sofia for not being more understanding of her sister's free spirit. Isabella Martinez was in her garden when Sofia arrived, tending to the roses she'd planted when they'd first bought the house 30 years earlier. She looked up with a smile that faded when she saw Sofia's expression. "Mija, what's wrong? Is the baby okay?" Sofia's carefully rehearsed speech crumbled, and she found herself sobbing in her mother's arms, the whole story spilling out between gasps. Isabella listened in stunned silence, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. "Ay, Dios mío," she whispered when Sofia finished. "How could Carmen do this to you? To our family?" Miguel emerged from the house, drawn by his wife's distressed voice, and had to sit down heavily on the garden bench when he heard the news. Sofia had never seen her strong, stoic father look so defeated. "What do you need from us, Mija?" he asked finally. "Whatever it is, we'll help you." Their unconditional support strengthened Sofia's resolve. She'd been worried they might try to convince her to work things out with James or make excuses for Carmen's behavior, but instead they were rallying around her. It was the first time in months that Sofia felt like she wasn't facing this crisis alone. That night, staying in her childhood bedroom while her parents slept, Sofia felt her daughter moving actively in her womb. She placed both hands on her belly and made a promise to the little girl who would arrive soon. "I'm going to make sure you grow up knowing your worth," she whispered. "No one is ever going to make you feel like you don't deserve better, especially not family." The decision to confront James directly rather than having papers served came suddenly Sunday morning. Sofia woke with absolute clarity about what she needed to do. She'd spent too many years avoiding confrontation, letting Carmen's bad behavior slide and overlooking James's increasing distance. This time, she was going to demand the truth and take control of her own narrative. She returned home before James was scheduled to come back from his supposed hospital shift, prepared her evidence, and waited. When he walked through the door at noon, looking refreshed rather than exhausted from a night of emergency surgery, Sofia was ready for him. "How was your night at the hospital?" she asked from the kitchen table, where she sat with his phone and printed copies of his text messages spread before her. James froze in the doorway as his medical bag dropped from his shoulder as he saw the evidence of his betrayal, laid out like an indictment. The color drained from his face, and for the first time since she'd known him, he was speechless. "Sofia, I can explain," he finally managed, his voice hoarse. "I'm sure you can," Sofia replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "You've been explaining away your lies for months, but I'm done listening to explanations. I want the truth, all of it, right now." The confrontation that followed would change both their lives forever, setting in motion events that neither of them could have anticipated. Sofia thought she knew the full scope of James and Carmen's betrayal, but she was about to discover that some secrets run deeper than even the worst betrayal she could imagine. James sank into the chair across from her, his hands shaking as he reached for the printed messages. His confident facade crumbled completely, revealing a man who looked genuinely terrified of losing everything he'd built his life around. "It started 6 months ago," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Carmen had been calling me, saying she was worried about you, about how the pregnancy was affecting you. She suggested we meet for coffee to discuss how to best support you." Sofia's laugh was bitter and sharp. "And you believed that Carmen, who's never shown concern for anyone but herself, was suddenly worried about my well-being?" James flinched at the truth in her words.
Words. I wanted to believe it. Things between us had been different since you got pregnant. You were tired all the time, focused on preparing for the baby. I felt like I was losing you to motherhood before our daughter was even born. The selfishness of his reasoning struck Sofia like a physical blow. She'd been carrying his child, dealing with morning sickness, exhaustion, and all the physical and emotional changes of pregnancy. And instead of supporting her, he'd sought comfort in her sister's arms? "So you decided to have an affair," Sofia said flatly, "because I was tired from growing your child inside my body?"
It wasn't supposed to happen, James continued, tears streaming down his face. Carmen was so understanding, so sympathetic. She made me feel like the man I used to be before everything became about doctor's appointments and baby preparations. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were having an emotional affair that turned physical. Sofia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The baby responded to her agitation with a series of sharp kicks that made her wince. Don't you dare blame this on my pregnancy or make it sound like you were the victim of circumstances. You made a choice, James. Every single time you lied to me about working late, every time you looked me in the eye and told me you loved me while you were sleeping with my sister, you made a conscious choice to betray me. James reached for her, but Sofia stepped back, her hand protectively covering her belly. Don't touch me. I can't stand the thought of your hands on me after they've been on Carmen. The revulsion in her voice seemed to break something in James. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed with the kind of raw grief Sofia had only seen in the families of patients who didn't survive surgery. But her heart remained closed to his pain. He'd forfeited her sympathy the moment he'd chosen to betray their marriage. What happens now? James asked when his tears subsided. Sofia, please, we can work through this. People survive infidelity all the time. We're having a baby together. We can go to counseling, start over, anything you need. Sofia had expected this plea, had even prepared herself for the possibility that some part of her might be tempted by the familiar path of forgiveness and reconciliation. But looking at James now, she felt nothing but a cold determination to protect herself and her daughter from further harm. I've already seen a lawyer, Sofia said quietly. I'm filing for divorce. I want you out of this house by the end of the week. James's face went white with shock. You can't be serious. Sofia, I made a mistake, but I love you. I love our baby. Don't destroy our family over this. You destroyed our family, Sofia replied. The moment you decided to start an affair with my sister. I'm just acknowledging reality. The conversation continued for another hour, with James alternating between desperate pleas and angry accusations. He claimed Sofia was being unreasonable, that she was punishing their unborn daughter by breaking up their home, that she'd regret this decision when she was struggling as a single mother. But Sofia had steeled herself against his manipulation tactics, recognizing them for what they were. Finally, exhausted by the emotional confrontation and physically drained by her advanced pregnancy, Sofia retreated to their bedroom and locked the door. She could hear James pacing the living room, occasionally speaking on the phone in hushed, urgent tones. She assumed he was calling Carmen, probably warning her that their secret was out. Sofia spent the night alternating between tears and planning. She made lists of practical concerns, contacted her supervisor at the hospital about adjusting her maternity leave plans, and researched apartments she could afford on her nursing salary. The future that had seemed so certain just days earlier had evaporated, leaving her to rebuild her life from scratch while preparing to become a single mother.
Counter-apologizing again and promising to do whatever she needed to make things right. But Sofia threw it away without reading it completely. Apologies were meaningless when they came after being caught rather than from genuine remorse. Sofia called in sick to work, unable to face her colleagues' questions about why she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Instead, she spent the morning on the phone with her lawyer, organizing the evidence of James's affair and beginning the formal divorce proceedings. Patricia Burns was efficient and compassionate, understanding that Sofia's priority was protecting her interests and her unborn child's future. It was during one of these legal conversations that Sofia's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, assuming it was a telemarketer, but something made her pick up. Sofia? This is Vanessa Chen. I think we need to talk. Sofia's breath caught. She recognized the name from James's text messages, one of several women he'd apparently been involved with beyond Carmen. I'm sorry, I don't know who you are.
I'm someone who's been seeing your husband, Vanessa said, her voice steady but strained. And I have information you're going to want to hear. The call would reveal secrets that made Carmen and James's affair seem like a minor betrayal in comparison. Sophia was about to learn that her husband's deception ran deeper than she'd ever imagined, and that the shocking news Vanessa had to share would change everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her sister, and the father of her unborn child. Sophia gripped the phone tighter, her heart hammering against her ribcage as she processed what Vanessa Chen had just said. The woman's voice carried a strange mixture of confidence and vulnerability that made Sophia's skin crawl. I don't understand, Sophia managed to say, though her mind was already racing with horrible possibilities. What kind of information? The kind that's going to make you realize that your sister Carmen isn't the only woman James has been deceiving, Vanessa replied. Can we meet? I think it's better if we discuss this in person. There are things you need to see. Sophia's first instinct was to hang up. She'd already discovered enough betrayal to last a lifetime, and part of her wanted to retreat into ignorance rather than face whatever new revelations the stranger might bring. But the protective instinct she felt for her unborn daughter overrode her desire to hide from the truth. Where? Sophia asked, her voice steadier than she felt. There's a coffee shop called Bella Vista on South Street. Do you know it? I can be there in an hour. Sophia knew the place, a small Italian cafe that served the best tiramisu in Philadelphia. She and James had gone there on their second date, sharing dessert while he told her about his dreams of opening a free clinic for underserved communities. The irony of meeting his mistress in a place tied to such hopeful memories wasn't lost on her. I'll be there, Sophia said, then added with more steel in her voice than she'd known she possessed. But if this is some kind of game or manipulation, I'm walking away immediately. It's not a game, Vanessa assured her. Trust me. I have no desire to be involved in this situation either. But there are things about James that you need to know before you make any permanent decisions about your future. The hour between the phone call and their meeting passed in a blur of anxiety and speculation. Sophia changed clothes 3 times, unable to decide what one wore to meet their husband's mistress. She finally settled on a simple black maternity dress that made her feel dignified, despite her emotional turmoil. Looking at herself in the mirror, she was struck by how much her face had changed in just the past week. The stress and lack of sleep had carved new lines around her eyes and left her skin pale and drawn. Bella Vista was moderately busy when Sophia arrived, filled with the usual mix of students from nearby University of Pennsylvania and young professionals grabbing afternoon coffee. She spotted Vanessa immediately, recognizing her from
photos she'd found on James's phone. The woman was strikingly beautiful in an understated way, with long black hair and intelligent dark eyes that reminded Sophia uncomfortably of her sister Carmen. Vanessa stood when Sophia approached, and Sophia was surprised by the genuine sympathy in her expression. Whatever Sophia had expected from this woman, it wasn't the apparent concern and regret she saw in her face. "Thank you for coming," Vanessa said, gesturing to the secluded corner table she'd chosen. "I know this must be incredibly difficult for you." Sophia settled into the chair across from her, acutely aware of how her pregnant belly made even simple movements awkward. "Let's just get to the point. What is it you think I need to know?" Vanessa opened a leather portfolio and pulled out a stack of papers and photographs. "I'm a pharmaceutical sales representative, like your sister. That's how James and I met at a medical conference in Chicago 6 months ago. He told me he was separated from his wife, going through a difficult divorce." The casual cruelty of the lie hit Sophia like a physical blow. 6 months ago, she'd been excitedly planning their baby shower and preparing the nursery. James had been present and attentive, or so she thought. Now she was learning that he'd been using her pregnancy as a cover story to seduce other women. He said his wife was mentally unstable, that the pregnancy had triggered severe depression and paranoia. Vanessa continued, her voice growing softer as she saw Sophia's reaction. He claimed she'd become obsessive and controlling, that he was staying in the marriage only until the baby was born to avoid the stress affecting the pregnancy. Sophia felt nauseous, and it had nothing to do with her condition. The calculated nature of James's deception was breathtaking.
He hadn't just been unfaithful, he'd created an elaborate fiction that painted her as the villain in their marriage. I believed him, Vanessa said, sliding a photograph across the table, until I saw this. The image showed James and Carmen together at what appeared to be an upscale restaurant. They were holding hands across the table, looking intimate and comfortable in a way that spoke of a long-established relationship. But what made Sofia's blood run cold was the timestamp on the photo. It was from 3 weeks ago, long after Vanessa claimed James had told her about his separated status. I hired a private investigator. Something about James's story didn't add up. He was too evasive about details, too careful about when and where we could meet. When I confronted him about the photo, he claimed Carmen was his sister-in-law who was helping him through the divorce proceedings. Sophia stared at the photograph, trying to process the layers of lies James had constructed. He'd been simultaneously lying to her about working late, lying to Vanessa about being separated, and lying to both of them about the nature of his relationship with Carmen. "There's more," Vanessa said, producing another set of photographs. "These are from last weekend, when he told you he was at the hospital for emergency surgery." The images showed James and Carmen entering a luxury hotel together, their body language clearly indicating they were a couple. Sophia recognized the dress Carmen was wearing. It was the same red one she'd worn to their house for dessert just days later. The audacity of her sister's performance that evening, pretending concern for Sophia's well-being while wearing the same outfit she'd seduced Sophia's husband in, made her stomach churn. "But that's not the worst part," Vanessa said, dropping her voice to almost a whisper. "James has been borrowing money from me, supposedly to pay for his lawyer fees for the divorce. $5,000 so far, which he promised to repay once his assets were unfrozen." Sophia's hands clenched into fists on the table. "There are no frozen assets. There's no divorce lawyer. We have a joint checking account that he has complete access to." "I know that now, but there's something else, something that made me realize I had
Contact you immediately. She pulled out a small velvet jewelry box and opened it to reveal an engagement ring with a stunning solitaire diamond. Sophia recognized it immediately as the ring from James's grandmother, the family heirloom he'd claimed was lost in a burglary the previous year. They'd even filed an insurance claim for it. "He gave this to me last week," Vanessa said quietly. "He said it belonged to his grandmother and that he wanted me to have it as a promise that we'd be together once his divorce was finalized. He told me he'd already proposed to his sister-in-law, Carmen, with a different ring, and that the three of us would be a family unit to help raise his daughter." The words hit Sophia like a series of physical blows. James hadn't just been having affairs, he'd been building relationships with multiple women based on elaborate lies, stealing from all of them in different ways. The engagement ring was worth at least $10,000, money they'd received from insurance that was supposed to go toward the baby's college fund. "He's been promising to marry both of you?" Sophia asked, her voice hollow with disbelief. "According to what he told me, yes. He painted this picture of an unconventional but loving family arrangement where Carmen would help raise the baby while we built a life together. He said you'd signed off on the whole arrangement as part of the divorce settlement, that you were relieved to have the support since you'd struggled with the pregnancy." Sophia pushed back from the table, needing space to process the magnitude of James's deception. He'd created parallel fantasy lives with multiple women, financing his lives with stolen money and family heirlooms, while painting her as everything from mentally unstable to enthusiastically supportive of his bigamous plans. "Why are you telling me this?" Sophia asked. "If you thought he was separated and getting divorced, why does it matter what I know?" Vanessa's composure finally cracked, and tears began streaming down her face. "Because I'm pregnant too," she whispered. "And when I told James yesterday, he didn't react the way I expected. He seemed panicked, angry even. He told me it was impossible, that we'd been careful, and he demanded I take another test. When I insisted it was accurate, he said some horrible things about what I should do about it." The coffee shop seemed to spin around Sophia as this final revelation sank in. James wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a man who'd impregnated multiple women while building elaborate lies to maintain his various relationships. The scope of his deception was breathtaking in its callousness and complexity. "How far along are you?" Sophia managed to ask. "About 6 weeks," Vanessa replied. "When I found out, I was excited. I thought James would be happy that maybe we could move up our timeline for being together. But his reaction made me realize something was very wrong. That's when I hired the private investigator and discovered the truth about his marriage to you. Sofia felt a strange kinship with this woman who'd been as thoroughly deceived as she had. Vanessa wasn't the predatory mistress Sofia had imagined. She was another victim of James's manipulations, another woman whose trust and love had been exploited for his selfish purposes. What are you going to do about the pregnancy? I mean, Vanessa wiped her eyes with a napkin, struggling to compose herself. I don't know. I'd planned to raise the baby with James, but now I realize he's not the man I thought he was. I have a good job, supportive parents, but a child deserves better than a father who's capable of this level of deception. They sat in silence for several minutes, two pregnant women grappling with the ruins of their respective relationships with the same man. Sofia found herself studying Vanessa's face, trying to understand what James had seen in her. She was undeniably beautiful, but there was also an intelligence and vulnerability that Sofia recognized. James had targeted women who would believe his lies, who had enough compassion to accept his supposed difficult circumstances.
There's something else you should know, Vanessa said finally. When I confronted James about the private investigator's findings, he admitted that Carmen isn't the only woman he's been involved with long-term. There's apparently someone else, someone he described as more complicated than our situations. Sofia's head was spinning with the endless revelations. Someone else? He wouldn't give me details, but he implied it was someone he'd been involved with even before you were married. Someone who'd been waiting for him to leave you. The thought that James's infidelity might predate their marriage entirely was almost too much for Sofia to process. She'd been so focused on the betrayal with Carmen that she hadn't considered the possibility that their entire relationship had been built on lies and deception. I think you need to dig deeper into his past, Vanessa said. There may be other women, other lies, other financial irregularities. The man I thought I knew doesn't exist, and I suspect the man you married doesn't either. Sofia left the coffee shop feeling like she was drowning in revelations. The James she'd loved and married was apparently a complete fabrication, a carefully constructed persona designed to hide a pattern of deception that spanned years. She drove home in a daze, her mind struggling to process not just the emotional betrayal, but the practical implications of being married to someone so fundamentally dishonest. Her house felt different when she entered, tainted by the knowledge of how extensively James had violated their sacred space. Every room held memories that now felt corrupted by his lies. The bedroom where they'd made love while he was simultaneously pursuing other women. The kitchen where he'd taken calls from his mistresses while she prepared dinner. The nursery they'd decorated together while he was planning separate futures with multiple women. Sofia found herself in the nursery, surrounded by the evidence of their shared dreams for their daughter's future. The crib they'd assembled together, the mobile she'd spent hours choosing, the tiny clothes organized by size in the dresser drawers. The realization that James had been participating in these preparations while actively betraying their family made her feel physically ill. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "We need to talk. I know Vanessa contacted you. Please let me explain before you make any decisions you'll regret." The casual tone, as if he were discussing a minor misunderstanding rather than a pattern of devastating betrayal, infuriated Sofia. She typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "Stay away from me. All communication goes through my lawyer now." His response came immediately. "Sofia, you're being unreasonable. I made mistakes, but I love you and our baby. Don't let other people destroy what we've built together." The audacity of blaming other people for destroying their marriage when he was the architect of every betrayal left Sofia speechless. She blocked his number and immediately called Patricia Burns to update her on the new information Vanessa had provided. "This changes everything," Patricia said after Sofia recounted the meeting.
If there are multiple women, potential financial fraud, and other long-term relationships, we need to conduct a thorough investigation of his assets and activities. I'm going to recommend we hire a forensic accountant and expand our discovery requests. Sofia agreed, though the thought of delving deeper into James's deceptions was exhausting. She wanted nothing more than to curl up in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house and pretend none of this was happening. But she had a daughter to protect, and that meant ensuring James couldn't continue to manipulate and deceive his way out of consequences. That evening, Sofia drove to her parents' house for dinner, needing the comfort of their unconditional support. Isabella took one look at her daughter's face and immediately wrapped her in a protective embrace that reminded Sofia of childhood scraped knees and broken friendships.
"Ay, mija, you look terrible," Isabella said, leading Sofia to the kitchen table where Miguel was reading the newspaper. "Have you been eating? Sleeping?" Sofia sank into her usual chair and let her parents fuss over her while she recounted the day's revelations. Their expressions grew increasingly horrified as she described James's multiple deceptions and the scope of his betrayals. "This man is sick," Miguel said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "To lie to so many women, to steal from them, to make promises he never intended to keep. This isn't just cheating, Sofia. This is the behavior of a predator." The word predator hit Sofia like a revelation. She'd been thinking of James as a cheating husband, but her father was right. The calculated nature of his deceptions, the way he'd targeted vulnerable women with elaborate lies, the financial manipulation, these weren't the actions of someone who'd simply made mistakes. They were the actions of someone who systematically exploited others for his own gratification. "What about Carmen?" Isabella asked quietly. "Have you spoken to her since you found out?" Sofia shook her head. She'd been so focused on dealing with James and the new revelations from Vanessa that she hadn't even confronted her sister directly. The thought of facing Carmen, of hearing whatever justifications or excuses she might offer, felt overwhelming. "She's called several times," Sofia admitted, left voicemails claiming she needs to explain that there are things I don't understand. "But I can't imagine what she could possibly say that would make any of this acceptable." Miguel leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped tightly together. "Maybe it's time you listen to what she has to say. Not to forgive her, but to understand the full scope of what's been happening. If James has been manipulating multiple women, it's possible Carmen is as much a victim as you and this other woman." Sofia bristled at the suggestion. "Carmen is my sister. She knew exactly what she was doing when she slept with my husband. She can't claim to be a victim when she actively participated in betraying me." "I'm not saying she's innocent," Miguel clarified, "but if this man is as manipulative as he appears to be, it's possible he's been lying to her too. Understanding his methods might help you protect yourself and your daughter." Isabella nodded in agreement. "Your father is right. We need to know everything if we're going to help you through this. And despite what Carmen has done, she's still family. We need to understand how deep this betrayal goes." The suggestion of reaching out to Carmen made Sofia's stomach churn, but she recognized the wisdom in her parents' advice. If James had been systematically deceiving everyone in his orbit, understanding the full scope of his manipulations would be crucial for protecting herself legally and emotionally. That night, alone in her childhood bedroom with her parents sleeping down the hall, Sofia finally listened to Carmen's voicemails. Her sister's voice progression through the messages was telling, starting with panicked denials and evolving into desperate pleas for understanding. In the first message, left the day after Sofia's confrontation with James, Carmen sounded defiant. "Sofia, I know James told you about us. I need you to know that we never meant for it to happen. We fell in love, and love doesn't follow rules or schedules. I know you're hurt, but maybe this is better for everyone. You and James were never really right for each other." The second message, from 2 days later, carried a different tone. "Sofia, please call me back. James is saying things that don't make sense. He's claiming there are other women, that he lied to me about things. I think we've both been deceived. Please, we need to talk." The third and most recent message was filled with desperation. "Sofia, I just found out James gave away grandmother's ring.
The one he told me was stolen. He's been lying to both of us, maybe about everything. I think I'm in danger. Please, I need your help." The fear in Carmen's voice during that final message gave Sofia pause. Whatever game James had been playing, it
Seemed Carmen was beginning to understand that she'd been as manipulated as everyone else. The mention of feeling in danger was particularly troubling, suggesting that James's deceptions might involve more than just emotional and financial manipulation. Sophia spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, trying to decide whether to respond to Carmen's pleas. Every instinct told her to protect herself from further emotional damage by maintaining distance from her sister. But the scared woman in those voicemails didn't sound like the confident seductress Sophia had imagined. She sounded like another one of James's victims, albeit one who'd caused tremendous collateral damage in the process. By morning, Sophia had made her decision. She would meet with Carmen, not to forgive or reconcile, but to gather information that might protect both of them from whatever James might do next. If he was truly as dangerous as Miguel had suggested, they needed to understand the full scope of his capabilities. Sophia called Carmen before she could change her mind, catching her sister at what sounded like a hotel room based on the background noise. "Sophia? Oh my God. I can't believe you called me back," Carmen said, her voice thick with tears. "I've been so scared, so confused. Nothing James told me was true." "Where are you?" Sophia asked, surprised by the genuine relief in her sister's voice. "I'm at a hotel near the airport. James told me to meet him here yesterday. Said we needed to talk about our future together. But when I got here, there were 2 other women waiting. Women I'd never seen before. He'd apparently made the same promises to all of us." Sophia's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, the same promises?" "Marriage. Children. A life together. Each of us thought we were his primary relationship, that the others were just complications he was dealing with. When we all realized what was happening, James became different. Angry in a way I'd never seen before. He said some terrible things about what he'd do if any of us tried to expose him." The implications of Carmen's words were terrifying. James hadn't just been conducting multiple affairs. He'd been building what amounted to a harem of deceived women, each believing they were his true love and future wife. When his carefully constructed world had finally collapsed, he had apparently revealed a much darker side of his personality. "Carmen, you need to get out of there," Sophia said urgently. "Come to Mom and Dad's house. We'll figure this out together, but you're not safe alone with him." "I can't," Carmen whispered. "He has photos, videos, things that would destroy my career if they got out. He's using them to keep all of us quiet. He said if any of us try to leave or expose him, he'll ruin our lives." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. James hadn't just been conducting multiple affairs, he'd been building what amounted to a harem of deceived women, each believing they were his true love and future wife. When his carefully constructed world had finally collapsed, he'd apparently revealed a much darker side of his personality. "Carmen, you need to get out of there," Sophia said urgently. "Come to Mom and Dad's house. We'll figure this out together, but you're not safe alone with him." "I can't," Carmen whispered. "He has photos, videos, things that would destroy my career if they got out. He's using them to keep all of us quiet. He said if any of us tried to leave or expose him, he'll ruin our lives."
Pack your things right now and get out of that hotel. Don't tell James where you're going. Drive straight to Mom and Dad's house, and when you get there, we're calling the police. This isn't just about affairs anymore. This is criminal behavior, and we need protection. The line went quiet for several long moments before Carmen spoke again, her voice small and frightened. "Sophia, I'm so sorry. I know I can't undo what I've done to you, what I've done to our family, but I'm scared of what he might do to all of us if we try to fight back." "We'll figure it out," Sophia promised, though she had no idea how they were going to extricate themselves from James's web of deceptions and threats. "Just get to safety first. Everything else we can deal with later." After hanging up, Sophia immediately called Patricia Burns to update her on these latest developments. The lawyer's reaction was swift and serious.
"This has moved beyond divorce proceedings," Patricia said. "If James is using blackmail and intimidation against multiple women, you need to contact law enforcement immediately. I'm going to recommend we file for emergency restraining orders for both you and your sister, and we need to document everything for potential criminal charges." Sofia also called Detective Maria Santos, a friend from nursing school who now worked with the Philadelphia Police Department's domestic violence unit. Maria listened to Sofia's story with growing concern, asking detailed questions about James's threats and behavior patterns. "This sounds like a classic case of what we call relationship fraud, men who systematically target multiple women with elaborate deception schemes, often using blackmail and intimidation to maintain control when their lies start unraveling. We need to get statements from all the women involved and gather evidence of his financial crimes." By the time Carmen arrived at their parents' house that afternoon, Sofia had assembled a small army of professionals to help them navigate the legal and safety implications of James's behavior. Carmen looked haggard and frightened, a far cry from the confident woman who'd seduced Sofia's husband just months earlier. "I brought everything," Carmen said, pulling out her phone and a laptop. "Photos, videos, financial records, everything James used to keep me quiet. I don't care what it costs me anymore. I just want this nightmare to end." As the sisters sat side by side on their parents' couch, sharing evidence of their mutual victimization by the same man, Sofia felt a complex mix of emotions. The anger and betrayal were still there, might always be there, but they were joined by a protective instinct toward the frightened woman beside her. Whatever Carmen had done, she was still Sofia's sister, and they were both carrying children who deserved protection from their father's criminal behavior. The evidence Carmen provided was damning and extensive. James had indeed been systematically documenting his relationships with multiple women, apparently as insurance against exposure. But in doing so, he'd also created a comprehensive record of his own criminal activities that would make prosecution much easier. "There are at least 6 women," Carmen revealed as they went through the files. "Each of us thought we were special, that the others were just temporary distractions he was dealing with. He told me you were mentally ill, that your marriage was over in everything but name. He told another woman that you died in a car accident. Each story was designed to make us feel sorry for him and justify the secrecy." Sofia felt sick as she processed the elaborate nature of James's deceptions. He'd created entirely fictional narratives about her and our marriage, painting himself as everything from a grieving widower to a man trapped by a mentally unstable wife. The casual cruelty of using her supposed death as a pickup line was breathtaking in its sociopathy. "What about the money?" Carmen pulled out a folder filled with bank statements and receipts. "At least $50,000 that I can document, probably more."
Convinced each of us to invest in various schemes, always with promises that the money would be returned with interest once his divorce was finalized or his assets were unfrozen. Classic con artist tactics, but we were all too emotionally invested to see through them. Detective Santos arrived that evening to take formal statements from both sisters and collect the evidence Carmen had brought. Her expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed the scope of James's activities. "This is one of the most extensive relationship fraud cases I've seen," Maria told Sofia privately. "The level of planning and manipulation involved suggests this is likely a long-established pattern of behavior. We'll need to investigate his background thoroughly, see if there are other victims who haven't come forward yet." That night, as Sofia lay in her childhood bed, with Carmen sleeping fitfully in the guest room down the hall, she tried to reconcile the man she'd loved with the predator he'd revealed himself to be. Every memory of their relationship was now tainted by the knowledge of his deceptions, every tender moment shadowed by the awareness of how thoroughly he'd manipulated her emotions and trust. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her mother's turmoil, and Sofia placed her hands on her belly protectively. Whatever happened next, she was determined that her daughter would grow up free from James's influence, protected from the kind of systematic manipulation that had devastated so many women's lives. The fight ahead would be difficult and complex, involving criminal charges, divorce proceedings, and the challenge of co-parenting with a man who'd proven himself capable of extraordinary deception and cruelty.
But Sofia was no longer fighting alone. She had her family support, legal representation, law enforcement backing, and even the unlikely alliance with her sister who'd wronged her so deeply. As dawn broke over Philadelphia, Sofia made a silent promise to her unborn daughter and to all the women James had victimized. They would not let him escape consequences for his actions. They would rebuild their lives on foundations of truth and integrity, far from the shifting sands of his lies and manipulations. The worst was behind them, even if they didn't yet know how much healing lay ahead. The Philadelphia Police Department's conference room felt sterile and imposing as Sofia sat across from Detective Santos and Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Torres. 3 weeks had passed since Carmen's revelation about the extent of James's deceptions, and the investigation had expanded far beyond what anyone had initially anticipated. What had started as a simple divorce case had evolved into a complex criminal investigation involving fraud, blackmail, identity theft, and racketeering charges. Sofia's hands rested protectively over her 8-month pregnant belly as she reviewed the victim impact statement she'd prepared. The baby had been particularly active lately, as if sensing the stress surrounding her impending arrival into a world already complicated by her father's crimes. Sofia had chosen to view her daughter's movements as signs of strength rather than distress, a reminder that new life could emerge from even the darkest circumstances. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was recovering from her father's death when James approached her at a medical conference.
Detective Santos continued. He claimed to be a widower raising a young daughter alone, needing support navigating single parenthood. She gave him $30,000 over 6 months, believing she was helping him pay for his daughter's private school and medical treatments. Sofia stared at Jennifer's photograph, a kind-faced pediatrician whose gentle eyes reminded her of her own reflection from happier times. The thought that James had used fictional stories about their real daughter to manipulate another woman made her feel physically ill. Lisa Chen, a pharmaceutical executive from Boston, met James when he posed as a divorced cardiologist looking to relocate for a fresh start. He convinced her to invest in a medical practice they would supposedly run together. She lost her entire inheritance from her grandmother, nearly $200,000. Each story followed a similar pattern. James would assume a slightly different identity, always building on his actual profession, but adapting his personal history to match what each woman needed to hear. To some, he was a grieving widower. To others, a man escaping an abusive marriage. To still others, like Vanessa, he was someone trapped in a loveless relationship with a mentally unstable wife. The sophistication of his operation is remarkable, ADA Torres explained. He maintains separate bank accounts, rental properties, and even different social media profiles for each identity. He kept detailed files on each woman, tracking their emotional vulnerabilities, financial situations, and relationship histories. This wasn't casual deception, it was a systematic criminal enterprise. Sofia felt a strange sense of validation hearing her former husband described in such clinical terms. For months, she'd struggled with feelings of shame and self-doubt, wondering how she could have been so thoroughly deceived by someone she'd shared a bed with for 3 years. Learning about the extent of his criminal sophistication helped her understand that she hadn't been naive or foolish. She'd been the target of an experienced predator who'd perfected his methods over years of practice. "What about the other women who are pregnant?" Sofia asked. Carmen mentioned there were others. Detective Santos consulted her notes. 4 women in total, including you and your sister. Vanessa Chen, whom you've met, and 2 others, Rachel Martinez from Miami and Diana Foster from Atlanta. James apparently saw pregnancy as a way to deepen his control over his victims, creating permanent ties that would make exposure more difficult. The calculated cruelty of using pregnancy as a manipulation tool struck Sofia as the most monstrous aspect of James's behavior. He deliberately created children as pawns in his criminal schemes, caring nothing for the innocent lives he was bringing into his web of deceptions. "Where is James now?" Sofia asked. "I haven't heard from him since Carmen and I filed the police reports." "He's been arrested," ADA Torres replied with satisfaction. "We coordinated with law enforcement in multiple states to take him into custody yesterday. He was attempting to flee the country using a false passport when airport security detained him.
He's being held without bail given the flight risk and the ongoing investigation. Relief flooded through Sofia so powerfully that she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. For weeks, she'd lived with the constant fear that James might appear at her workplace, her parents' house, or anywhere else she felt safe. The knowledge that he was finally in custody allowed her to breathe freely for the first time since this nightmare had begun. "What happens now?" Sofia asked. "With the trial, I mean." "James has been offered a plea deal," ADA Torres explained. 25 years in federal prison in exchange for guilty pleas to racketeering, fraud, and identity theft charges. His assets will be liquidated to provide restitution to his victims, though, unfortunately, much of the money he stole has been spent or hidden in offshore accounts we may never recover. Sofia absorbed this information with mixed
feelings. 25 years felt like justice for the scope of his crimes, but she knew it would never truly compensate for the emotional devastation he'd caused to so many women. The financial losses were devastating for his victims, but the psychological trauma would last far longer than any prison sentence. "There is something else you should know," Detective Santos said carefully. "James wants to see you. He's been requesting meetings since his arrest, claiming he has important information about your daughter that you need to hear." The suggestion made Sofia's skin crawl. She had no desire to ever see James again, let alone provide him with an opportunity to manipulate her further. But the mention of information about her daughter gave her pause. "What kind of information?" Sofia asked, reluctantly. "He won't say. His lawyer claims it's related to your daughter's paternity and health, but given James's history of manipulation, we suspect it's another attempt to control the narrative or negotiate better terms for himself." Sofia's hand moved instinctively to her belly. The paternity question had been settled weeks earlier through prenatal testing that confirmed James was indeed the father of her unborn daughter. She couldn't imagine what health-related information he might possess that wasn't already in her medical records. "I don't want to see him," Sofia said firmly. "Whatever he thinks he needs to tell me can go through lawyers. I won't give him another opportunity to manipulate me or anyone else." ADA Torres nodded approvingly. "That's probably wise. In our experience, these final requests for meetings are usually attempts to maintain psychological control rather than genuine efforts to provide helpful information." The meeting concluded with discussions about trial timelines and victim compensation procedures. Sofia left the police station feeling emotionally drained, but hopeful that justice would finally be served. The legal process would be long and complex, but James's arrest marked the beginning of accountability for his crimes. That evening, Sofia attended a support group for fraud victims that Detective Santos had recommended. The group met weekly in the basement of a community center in Center City, led by Dr. Sarah Patterson, a psychologist who specialized in recovery from financial and emotional abuse. The other group members welcomed Sofia with the kind of understanding that could only come from shared experience. There was Margaret, a retired teacher who'd lost her pension to a romance scammer she'd met online. David, a small business owner whose partner had embezzled their entire operating fund before disappearing. Jennifer, the pediatrician Sofia had read about earlier, who'd driven down from New York to attend the Philadelphia meetings. "The hardest part isn't the money," Jennifer shared during that night's session. "It's learning to trust your own judgment again. James was so convincing, so consistent in his lies, that I started doubting my ability to read people accurately. How do you move forward when you can't trust yourself to recognize deception?" Sofia nodded, recognizing her own struggles in Jennifer's words. "I keep replaying conversations we had, looking for signs I missed. But the truth is, there weren't any obvious signs because he was a professional at this. He'd perfected his act over years of practice." Dr. Patterson leaned forward in her chair. "It's important to remember that skilled manipulators succeed precisely because they're good at what they do. Your inability to detect their deception isn't a personal failing. It's evidence of their criminal expertise. Healing begins when you stop blaming yourself for being victimized by someone who made manipulation their profession." The group sessions became a lifeline for Sofia as she navigated the final weeks of her pregnancy. The other members understood the complex emotions she was experiencing, the shame, anger, fear, and gradual emergence of hope in ways that even her supportive family couldn't fully grasp.
They celebrated small victories together, like Sofia's decision to keep her daughter's nursery in her new apartment, starting over completely, and supported each other through setbacks, like the days when the trauma felt overwhelming. Carmen had also joined a therapy group, though she attended sessions in a different location to give both sisters space to heal independently. Their relationship remained complicated, marked by tentative communication and careful boundaries. Carmen was facing criminal charges as an accessory to some of James's schemes, having unknowingly helped him research potential victims through her pharmaceutical industry contacts. Her cooperation with the investigation had earned her a plea deal that would likely result in probation rather than prison time, but the professional and personal consequences of her involvement continued to unfold. "I know I can't undo what I did to you," Carmen had written in a letter she'd sent through their mother, "but I want you to know that I'm getting help, real help, to understand how I became someone capable of betraying my own sister. I hope someday we can find a way to be family again, for our daughter's sake, if nothing else." Sofia had kept the letter but hadn't responded yet. Forgiveness felt like a distant possibility, something that might emerge with time and continued healing, but not something she was ready to offer immediately. The focus needed to remain on building a healthy future for herself and her daughter. 3 weeks before her due date, Sofia received unexpected news that changed everything she thought she knew about James's motivations. Detective Santos called early one morning with information that had emerged from the ongoing investigation into his financial crimes. "We found something in James's safety deposit box that you need to know about," Detective Santos said, her voice carefully controlled. "Medical records and legal documents related to your pregnancy. It appears James has been planning something involving your daughter since before she was conceived." Sofia's blood ran cold. What kind of planning? He had preliminary adoption papers drawn up listing himself and Carmen as the biological parents and identifying prospective adoptive families. "It looks like he was planning to sell your daughter to the highest bidder while maintaining the fiction that Carmen was the biological mother." The words hit Sofia like a physical blow. James hadn't just been stealing money from women, he'd been planning to steal her child, using Carmen as a cover to make the adoption appear legitimate. The scope of his criminal intentions was even more monstrous than anyone had realized. "There's more," Detective Santos continued. "We found evidence that he'd made similar plans with at least 2 other pregnant victims. He was essentially running an illegal adoption ring, using his relationships with multiple women to create a supply of infants for wealthy buyers who were willing to pay premium prices for healthy babies from educated parents." Sofia sank into a chair, her hands shaking as she processed this information. James hadn't just been stealing from vulnerable women, he'd been planning to steal her child, using Carmen as a cover to make the adoption appear legitimate. The scope of his criminal intentions was even more monstrous than anyone had realized. "Is my daughter safe now?" Sofia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Completely safe," Detective Santos assured her. "James is in federal custody, and all his co-conspirators have been arrested. The prospective buyers are being investigated for their involvement in the illegal adoption scheme. Your daughter is going home with you, and James will never have the opportunity to harm either of you again." The revelation about James's plans for their daughter added another layer of complexity to Sofia's healing process. She thought she understood the scope of his betrayal, but learning about his intention to sell their child revealed a level of evil she struggled to comprehend. The man she had loved and planned to build a family with had viewed their daughter as nothing more than a profitable asset to be liquidated.
Help Sofia process this new information during individual therapy sessions that supplemented the group meetings. What you're experiencing is a form of trauma that goes beyond typical relationship betrayal, Dr. Patterson explained. James didn't just violate your trust, he planned to literally steal your child. The healing process will take time, and it's important to be patient with yourself as you work through these emotions. Sofia's parents had been devastated by the news about James's adoption scheme, with Miguel declaring that he'd personally testify at trial to ensure James received the maximum possible sentence. Isabella had thrown herself into preparing for her granddaughter's arrival, creating a support system that would allow Sofia to focus on bonding with her baby rather than worrying about practical concerns. The nursery in Sofia's new apartment became a symbol of triumph over James's plans. Every item she'd chosen, from the soft yellow walls to the handmade quilts her mother had sewn, represented a future that James had tried to steal but couldn't touch now. Sofia spent hours in that room during her final weeks of pregnancy, reading to her daughter and making promises about the life they would build together. Labor began on a quiet Sunday morning in late September, 3 days before Sofia's due date. Isabella drove her to the hospital, while Miguel followed with the carefully packed bags they'd prepared weeks earlier. Carmen had asked to be notified when the baby was born, but Sofia had decided she wanted to focus entirely on her daughter's arrival, without the complicated emotions her sister's presence would bring. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, Sofia's obstetrician, had been briefed on the unusual circumstances surrounding the pregnancy, and had arranged for extra security at the hospital to ensure James couldn't somehow gain access to Sofia or the baby. The precautions felt excessive, given his incarceration, but Sofia appreciated the peace of mind they provided. 8 hours after her labor began, Sofia held her daughter for the first time. Elena Isabella Martinez weighed 7 pounds, 2 ounces, and had her mother's dark hair and what appeared to be her grandmother's gentle eyes. Looking into that perfect face, Sofia felt a fierce, protective love that overshadowed every pain and betrayal she'd endured over the past months. "She's beautiful, mija," Isabella whispered, tears streaming down her face as she watched Sofia cradle her granddaughter. "Look how she's looking at you. She knows her mama." Sofia traced Elena's tiny features with one finger, marveling at the miracle of this new life that had emerged from such darkness. James's DNA might be part of Elena's genetic makeup, but she would grow up surrounded by love, honesty, and people who valued her for herself rather than as a commodity to be exploited. The first few weeks of motherhood were challenging but deeply rewarding. Sofia had taken extended maternity leave, using the time to bond with Elena and establish routines that would support them both as they built their new life together. The sleep deprivation was exhausting, but Sofia found herself grateful for the busy schedule that left little time for dwelling on the trauma of the past year. Carmen sent flowers and a carefully chosen children's book when Elena was born, along with a note requesting permission to meet her niece when Sofia felt ready. Sofia appreciated the respectful distance her sister was maintaining, understanding that rebuilding trust would require time and consistent evidence of changed behavior. James's trial began when Elena was 2 months old. Sofia had decided not to attend most of the proceedings, wanting to focus her energy on her daughter, rather than reliving the details of his crimes in a courtroom. She did provide victim impact testimony via video link, speaking directly to the judge about how James's deceptions had affected her life and her daughter's future. James Whitmore didn't just steal money from his victims, Sofia said, looking directly into the camera. He stole our sense of safety, our ability to trust, our confidence in our own judgment.
He planned to steal my daughter and sell her to strangers, treating an innocent child as merchandise in his criminal enterprise. The damage he's caused will take years to fully heal, but I want this court to know that his victims are survivors, not just casualties of his crimes. The judge sentenced James to 30 years in federal prison, 5 years more than the plea deal that had been offered. The additional time reflected the court's revulsion at the illegal adoption scheme and the systematic nature of his crimes against multiple victims. Sofia felt a deep sense of relief when Detective Santos called with the news, knowing that Elena would be 18 years old before James could possibly be released from prison. The Victim Restitution Fund provided some financial compensation, though far less than most victims had lost to James's schemes. Sofia used her portion to establish a college fund for Elena and to make a down payment on a small house in a safe neighborhood with good schools. The money couldn't undo the damage James had caused, but it provided practical support for building the stable future she wanted for her daughter. As Elena's first birthday approached, Sofia reflected on how much their lives had changed since those dark days when James's deceptions had first been revealed. The baby who'd been intended as merchandise in a criminal scheme was now a happy, healthy toddler who brought joy to everyone who met her. She was walking confidently, saying her first words, and showing signs of the gentle curiosity that Sofia hoped would serve her well throughout her life. The relationship with Carmen remained complicated, but was slowly improving. Carmen had completed her community service and was attending regular therapy sessions to address the issues that had made her vulnerable to James's manipulations. She'd found work with a new pharmaceutical company that didn't require travel, allowing her to be more present for her own daughter, Maria, who was now 6 months old. The sisters had begun having supervised visits at their parents' house, carefully structured interactions that allowed their daughters to know each other while maintaining the boundaries Sofia needed for her emotional well-being. Carmen was respectful of these limitations, never pushing for more access than Sofia was comfortable providing. I watch her with Elena and I see glimpses of the sister I remember from our childhood, Sofia confided to Dr. Patterson during one of their sessions. The person who helped me with homework and defended me from bullies at school. I think that person is still there, underneath all the damage that James and her own choices caused. Dr. Patterson nodded thoughtfully. Healing isn't just about recovering from trauma, it's about deciding what kind of future you want to create. The fact that you're even considering the possibility of rebuilding a relationship with Carmen shows remarkable strength and wisdom. Sofia's romantic life remained on hold as she focused on motherhood and continued healing. She'd had coffee a few times with Daniel, the structural engineer she'd met before her world had imploded, but had been honest about needing time to process her experiences before being ready for a new relationship. Daniel had been understanding and patient, leaving the door open for future possibilities while respecting her need for space. Elena is my priority right now, Sofia explained to her friends who encouraged her to start dating again. I want to make sure I've fully healed from what James did before I bring anyone new into our lives. She deserves a mother who can trust her own judgment and model healthy relationships. The support group continued to be an important part of Sofia's weekly routine, even as she moved from victim to survivor to someone who could offer guidance to newly traumatized group members. She found purpose in helping other women understand that recovery was possible, that the shame and self-doubt James and people like him inflicted could be overcome with time and proper support. Jennifer Walsh had become a close friend through the group.
Someone who understood both the specific trauma of being victimized by James and the broader challenge of rebuilding trust in relationships. They often met for coffee while their children played together, Elena and Jennifer's adopted son becoming fast friends despite their age difference. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if we hadn't discovered the truth about James, Jennifer reflected during one of their conversations. How many more women would he have victimized? How many more children would have been born into his web of lies? Sofia nodded, watching Elena stack blocks with the focused concentration that reminded her daily of the precious life that had emerged from such darkness. I try not to think about the what-ifs too much. What matters is that he can't hurt anyone else now, and our children are safe. On Elena's first birthday, Sofia threw a small party at her parents' house, inviting the family and friends who'd supported them through the difficult first year.
Carmen attended with Maria, and Sofia felt a cautious optimism watching their daughters play together under Isabella's delighted supervision. The sisters weren't ready for deep conversations about forgiveness and reconciliation, but they were building a foundation for whatever relationship might be possible in the future. Miguel gave a toast during the party, raising his glass to honor his granddaughter and the strength his elder daughter had shown in protecting them both. "Elena is here because her mother refused to let evil win," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She chose love over fear, hope over despair, and truth over the lies that could have destroyed our family." As Sofia tucked Elena into her crib that night, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment of peace and security. The betrayal and trauma would always be part of their story, but they no longer defined their future. Elena would grow up knowing she was wanted, valued, and protected by people who saw her as a precious gift rather than a commodity to be exploited. Sofia had learned to trust herself again, to believe in her ability to make good decisions and protect the people she loved. The scars from James's deceptions would always remain, but they'd been integrated into a stronger, wiser version of herself who could model resilience and hope for her daughter. Standing in Elena's nursery, watching her daughter sleep peacefully in the safety they'd built together, Sofia felt grateful for the unexpected strength she'd discovered within herself. She'd survived betrayal, protected her child from harm, and helped bring a dangerous criminal to justice. Most importantly, she'd created a foundation of love and truth that would support Elena throughout her life. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities that James's plans would have stolen forever. Sofia had reclaimed not just her own life, but her daughter's potential for happiness, safety, and authentic relationships built on honesty rather than manipulation. It was the greatest victory she could have asked for, and the sweetest justice she could have imagined.
Reported, sliding a thick folder across the table. James's patent goes back at least 7 years, possibly longer. Each victim was targeted during vulnerable periods in their lives, divorces, job losses, deaths in the family. He researched them extensively before making contact, tailoring his approach to exploit their specific emotional needs. Sofia opened the folder to find photographs and basic information about James's other victims. The women ranged in age from 25 to 42, came from various professional backgrounds, and lived in cities across the eastern United States. What they shared was an intelligence and compassion that James had apparently identified as exploitable traits. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was recovering from her father's death when James approached her at a medical conference, Detective Santos continued. He claimed to be a widower raising a young daughter alone, needing support navigating single parenthood. She gave him $30,000 over 6 months, believing she was helping him pay for his daughter's private school and medical treatments. Sofia stared at Jennifer's photograph, a kind-faced pediatrician whose gentle eyes reminded her of her own reflection from happier times. The thought that James had used fictional stories about their real daughter to manipulate another woman made her feel physically ill. Lisa Chen, a pharmaceutical executive from Boston, met James when he posed as a divorced cardiologist looking to relocate for a fresh start. He convinced her to invest in a medical practice they would supposedly run together. She lost her entire inheritance from her grandmother, nearly $200,000. Each story followed a similar pattern. James would assume a slightly different identity, always building on his actual profession, but adapting his personal history to match what each woman needed to hear. To some, he was a grieving widower. To others, a man escaping an abusive marriage. To still others, like Vanessa, he was someone trapped in a loveless relationship with a mentally unstable wife. The sophistication of his operation is remarkable, ADA Torres explained. He maintained separate bank accounts, rental properties, and even different social media profiles for each identity. He kept detailed files on each woman, tracking their emotional vulnerabilities, financial situations, and relationship histories. This wasn't casual deception. It was a systematic criminal enterprise.
Sofia felt a strange sense of validation hearing her former husband described in such clinical terms. For months, she'd struggled with feelings of shame and self-doubt, wondering how she could have been so thoroughly deceived by someone she'd shared a bed with for 3 years. Learning about the extent of his criminal sophistication helped her understand that she hadn't been naive or foolish. She'd been the target of an experienced predator who'd perfected his methods over years of practice. "What about the other women who were pregnant?" Sofia asked. Carmen mentioned there were others. Detective Santos consulted her notes. 4 women in total, including you and your sister, Vanessa Chen, whom you've met, and 2 others, Rachel Martinez from Miami and Diana Foster from Atlanta. James apparently saw pregnancy as a way to deepen his control over his victims, creating permanent ties that would make exposure more difficult. The calculated cruelty of using pregnancy as a manipulation tool struck Sofia as the most monstrous aspect of James's behavior. He deliberately created children as pawns in his criminal schemes, caring nothing for the innocent lives he was bringing into his web of deceptions. "Where is James now?" Sofia asked. "I haven't heard from him since Carmen and I filed the police reports." "He's been arrested," ADA Torres replied with satisfaction. "We coordinated with law enforcement in multiple states to take him into custody yesterday. He was attempting to flee the country using a false passport when airport security detained him. He's being held without bail, given the flight risk and the ongoing investigation." Relief flooded
through Sofia so powerfully that she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. For weeks, she'd lived with the constant fear that James might appear at her workplace, her parents' house, or anywhere else she felt safe. The knowledge that he was finally in custody allowed her to breathe freely for the first time since this nightmare had begun. "What happens now?" Sofia asked. "With the trial, I mean." "James has been offered a plea deal," ADA Torres explained. 25 years in federal prison in exchange for guilty pleas to racketeering, fraud, and identity theft charges. His assets will be liquidated to provide restitution to his victims, though unfortunately, much of the money he stole has been spent or hidden in offshore accounts we may never recover. Sofia absorbed this information with mixed feelings. 25 years felt like justice for the scope of his crimes, but she knew it would never truly compensate for the emotional devastation he'd caused to so many women. The financial losses were devastating for his victims, but the psychological trauma would last far longer than any prison sentence. "There's something else you should know," Detective Santos said carefully. "James wants to see you. He's been requesting meetings since his arrest, claiming he has important information about your daughter that you need to hear." The suggestion made Sofia's skin crawl. She had no desire to ever see James again, let alone provide him with an opportunity to manipulate her further. But the mention of information about her daughter gave her pause. "What kind of information?" Sofia asked reluctantly. "He won't say. His lawyer claims it's related to your daughter's paternity and health, but given James's history of manipulation, we suspect it's another attempt to control the narrative or negotiate better terms for himself." Sofia's hand moved instinctively to her belly. The paternity question had been settled weeks earlier through prenatal testing that confirmed James was indeed the father of her unborn daughter. She couldn't imagine what health-related information he might possess that wasn't already in her medical records. "I don't want to see him," Sofia said firmly. "Whatever he thinks he needs to tell me can go through lawyers. I won't give him another opportunity to manipulate me or anyone else." ADA Torres nodded approvingly. "That's probably wise. In our experience, these final requests for meetings are usually attempts to maintain psychological control rather than genuine efforts to provide helpful information." The meeting concluded with discussions about trial timelines and victim compensation procedures. Sofia left the police station feeling emotionally drained, but hopeful that justice would finally be served. The legal process would be long and complex, but James's arrest marked the beginning of accountability for his crimes. That evening, Sofia attended a support group for fraud victims that Detective Santos had recommended. The group met weekly in the basement of a community center in Center City, led by Dr. Sarah Patterson, a psychologist who specialized in recovery from financial and emotional abuse.
The other group members welcomed Sofia with the kind of understanding that could only come from shared experience. There was Margaret, a retired teacher who'd lost her pension to a romance scammer she'd met online. David, a small business owner whose partner had embezzled their entire operating fund before disappearing. Jennifer, the pediatrician Sofia had read about earlier, who'd driven down from New York to attend the Philadelphia meetings. The hardest part isn't the money, Jennifer shared during that night's session. It's learning to trust your own judgment again. James was so convincing, so consistent in his lives that I started doubting my ability to read people accurately. How do you move forward when you can't trust yourself to recognize deception? Sofia nodded, recognizing her own struggles in Jennifer's words. I keep replaying conversations we had, looking for signs I missed, but the truth is there weren't any obvious signs, because he was a professional at this. He'd perfected his act
Over years of practice, Dr. Patterson leaned forward in her chair. It's important to remember that skilled manipulators succeed precisely because they're good at what they do. Your inability to detect their deception isn't a personal failing. It's evidence of their criminal expertise. Healing begins when you stop blaming yourself for being victimized by someone who made manipulation their profession. The group sessions became a lifeline for Sofia as she navigated the final weeks of her pregnancy. The other members understood the complex emotions she was experiencing, the shame, anger, fear, and gradual emergence of hope, in ways that even her supportive family couldn't fully grasp. They celebrated small victories together, like Sofia's decision to keep her daughter's nursery in her new apartment rather than starting over completely, and supported each other through setbacks, like the days when the trauma felt overwhelming. Carmen had also joined a therapy group, though she attended sessions in a different location to give both sisters space to heal independently. Their relationship remained complicated, marked by tentative communication and careful boundaries. Carmen was facing criminal charges as an accessory to some of James's schemes, having unknowingly helped him research potential victims through her pharmaceutical industry contacts. Her cooperation with the investigation had earned her a plea deal that would likely result in probation rather than prison time, but the professional and personal consequences of her involvement continued to unfold. I know I can't undo what I did to you, Carmen had written in a letter she'd sent through their mother, but I want you to know that I'm getting help, real help, to understand how I became someone capable of betraying my own sister. I hope someday we can find a way to be family again, for our daughter's sake, if nothing else. Sofia had kept the letter, but hadn't responded yet. Forgiveness felt like a distant possibility, something that might emerge with time and continued healing, but not something she was ready to offer immediately. The focus needed to remain on building a healthy future for herself and her daughter. 3 weeks before her due date, Sofia received unexpected news that changed everything she thought she knew about James's motivations. Detective Santos called early one morning with information that had emerged from the ongoing investigation into his financial crimes. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.